Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Amstrad, get real, get Amstrad.
Europe is cracking down on radical Islam. A spate of terror attacks have forced European nations to frame laws against political Islam. We've spoken at length about France. Tonight, we will look at Austria. Its Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, is now moving Parliament to shut down mosques. He wants to create a central register of imams, jail terrorists for life, and conduct electronic surveillance. The question is, will such moves ensure a terror-free Europe? Have such moves ensured peace in the past, or are European leaders still missing the point? Are they ignoring the root of the problem? I have another question. How do you think Europe, the self-proclaimed guardian of secularism, would have reacted if India had proposed such sweeping laws? We raised this question before. We'll do it again tonight. We will discuss all of this and more on Gravitas tonight. First, as always, we'll take a look at what else is coming up on the show. What is Joe Biden's China plan? Will he be soft on Beijing? He made the first calls to world leaders since the election. Whom did he call, in fact, and what did he say? That is a message to China. We'll explain. The vaccine may be rolled out in a matter of weeks, but who will get the first shot? What are governments doing to secure their share? We'll talk about that as well. China has been conducting guided tours of Tibet, taking international journalists and diplomats on controlled visits, but it's not working out as planned. Alibaba registered sales worth $74 billion in the last 11 days. Why has its share tanked 10%? Almost. Why are China's tech giants bleeding? Blame Xi Jinping. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
India's IT ministry has sent a notice to Twitter for showing Leh as a part of Jammu and Kashmir instead of the Union Territory of Ladakh. The ministry, in its notice, has directed Twitter to explain within 5 working days why legal action should not be initiated against Twitter for disrespecting the territorial integrity of India. Following the disqualification of 4 Hong Kong lawmakers, China could face fresh sanctions from US and UK. Washington has accused Beijing of flagrant violation of commitments, while the UK's junior foreign minister said they are considering sanctions. As India registers recovery from the economic slowdown, the Indian finance minister today announced a series of measures, including guaranteed credit support for 26 stressed sectors and income tax support for the housing and real estate sector. The Provident Fund burden will be taken over by the government if eligible companies hire new employees or for the employees who have been laid off recently. The European Commission has proposed new rules to grant the European Union the power to declare a health emergency. The proposal aims to ensure more coordination among EU states. EU members slammed the WHO for the delay in declaring the coronavirus pandemic, and now the bloc is seeking powers to declare such an emergency on its own. Russia and Turkey have signed a memorandum of understanding towards the creation of a joint peacekeeping center. Russian peacekeeping troops have started deployment in Nagorno-Karabakh hours after Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to halt fighting over the region. The United Nations Refugee Agency has said it fears a growing humanitarian emergency among civilians forced to flee fighting in the Tigray region. Even as Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the region has been liberated after launching a military offensive. The International Atomic Energy Agency has sent a warning on the Iranian uranium stockpile. The agency says Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium is 12 times the amount permitted in the 2015 nuclear agreement. Typhoon Vamco has left 40,000 homes submerged in the Philippines, with nearly 200,000 people evacuated from the vulnerable coastal and low-lying areas. Torrential rains lashed the Philippines, killing at least one person and paralyzing parts of the capital, Manila. World champions France have seen their 12-match winning streak abruptly ended with a shock 2-0 defeat to minnows Finland. Both teams fielded under-strength 11s for their friendly in Paris, but 2 goals in the space of 3 first-half minutes from debutants Marcus Four and Ani Valakari gave Finland their first ever win against the French. Elsewhere, Netherlands fought back in the second half to claim a 1-1 draw against fellow heavyweight Spain in Amsterdam. Organizers of next year's Olympic Games have said that Tokyo-bound athletes will not be subjected to compulsory quarantine on arrival. Officials are instead looking to implement pre-screening measures after admitting that it was impossible to quarantine 20,000 athletes and support staff. The organizers are also contemplating allowing a limited number of overseas fans to attend the Games, but warn that stringent guidelines and rules will have to be followed.
The European Union is on a mission to root out radical Islam. The deadly terror attacks in the past few weeks have triggered a chain reaction. First, it was President Emmanuel Macron of France. Now it is Chancellor Sebastian Kurz of Austria. His country was attacked 10 days ago. 4 people have died, more than 20 were hurt. In less than 2 weeks, Austria has hit back. A major crackdown is underway. The Chancellor is moving the parliament. He wants to ban political Islam. He wants sweeping powers to go after terrorists. Kurz has 5 specific proposals. Number 1, the power to jail terrorists for life. No matter how long the jail term of a convict, they will remain in custody until they've been de-radicalized. Proposal number 2, the power to conduct electronic surveillance of those convicted in terror-related offences. Austria wants to track them. It wants to put digital bracelets on them. Number 3, criminalize religiously motivated political extremism. What does that mean? It means a ban on political Islam. Religiously motivated acts of extremism, efforts to preach radicalism will all be criminal offences in Austria. Proposal number 4, a simpler process to shut down mosques. The mosques that are involved in radicalizing people. Plus a proposal to create a central register of imams. And 5, preventive detention for people previously convicted of terror offences, presumably to thwart potential terror attacks. As I said earlier, these are sweeping powers. The Austrian Chancellor wants all of them because he says radicals are like a time bomb. And he wants to take strong and effective steps to reduce the threat level they pose.
Zu schützen. Für diejenigen.
This is a major intervention, but in my opinion, a necessary step to minimize the threat to our population. This means that in the future, it is not only a question of punishing crime, but above all, we must go and use every means to protect the population, because many of these people are nothing more than time bombs.
Bedrohungsrisiko für unsere Bevölkerung zu minimieren.
Austria is working on a two-pronged approach. It is focusing on two targets. One is the terror suspects and the second is the ideology that drives them. The Austrian government has cleared these radical measures. Now the parliament has to clear them through a vote, and that's expected to happen next month in December. And this is not the first time that Austria has been confronted with the threat of Islamism. They've had something called the Islamic law since 1912. More than 100 years. And this is a law to regulate the relationship between the state and the Muslim community. In the year 2015, Austria amended this law. It revised the criteria for the appointment of imams. It added a new rule that made it mandatory for imams to know how to speak in German. It also banned foreign funding to Islamic institutions. Now the rest of Europe is trying to do the same. Austria did this 5 years ago, and now the government feels that it needs more powers. Why? Because Austria has high levels of jihadi radicalization. Reports say as many as 300 people from Austria joined the Islamic State. So 300 may not sound like a very big number, but Austria's population is only 9 million. That's less than half of New Delhi's population. With 300 ISIS fighters, Austria has among the worst records in Europe on a per capita basis. More than 100 of these fighters are still out of the country.
Wir haben über 300,
We have more than 300 foreign terrorist fighters, of whom nearly 100 have returned. And about 60 have been prevented from leaving the country. More than 70 have died in combat, and more than 100 are still in combat territory.
70 sind im Kampfeinsatz gestorben.
There are more threats from for the Chancellor to consider, like the Muslim Brotherhood. In 2019, Austria banned symbols of the Muslim Brotherhood. 2 years back, 7 mosques were shut. 60 imams, 60, were asked to leave the country. It hasn't been enough, so the government has launched a bigger crackdown. Since the attacks in Vienna, the country's security establishment has been working overtime to dismantle terror networks. On Monday, they carried out a large-scale operation. More than 70 individuals and several organizations were on target. They are allegedly linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. But they've all been put under investigation for a range of crimes, from financial irregularities to terror support. So why are so many suspects being probed when they had no direct link to the Vienna attacks? Because Austria wants to dismantle the entire Islamist infrastructure. And it is not alone in this crackdown. Across Europe, governments have woken up to the threat of Islamism. They're working on a common draft to control radicals. Since the beheading in Paris, the EU leadership has been talking tough, and now they've begun to act. So will a pan-European war on Islamism, what will it look like? This report has some answers.
Europe's crackdown has begun. The end game is to root out Islamist terrorism. It's an audacious goal, but one that the leadership is confident of achieving. Part 1 of the plan is to regulate borders. Both France and Germany have called for tighter control. One way of doing this is the entry-exit system, replacing passports with automatic monitoring.
I want to mention the entry-exit system or exit-entry system in the Schengen area that should be ready by 2022. This is vitally necessary to know who comes in and who leaves the Schengen area. And we also need this information about countries with whom we have visa-free travel agreements.
Asylum is the other big issue. During the war against ISIS, thousands of refugees sought asylum in Europe. Many were granted. Half a decade later, Europe is reeling under extremism. The French president believes there is a link.
In all our countries, we are witnessing a misuse of the right to asylum. The right of asylum is made for peace fighters, those who take a risk for their political choice in their country. And today we see more and more people asking for asylum in Europe and coming from countries that are not at war.
So that's one part of the plan. Limit entry into the European Union. But what about extremist elements who are already inside? Most countries in Europe are preparing a terror watch list. It includes people who are at risk of radicalization. France has at least 8,000 people on its watch list. The crackdown also extends to the internet. It has become fertile ground for radicalization. The EU wants tech giants to do more.
It's clear that the large platforms can't keep an eye on all their content at once. But the moment they are given evidence that there is something on their site that is criminal or damaging, they have to react straight away and quickly.
In other words, they want access to encrypted messages like WhatsApp. This plan is borderline unconstitutional. It cuts at the root of privacy and freedom. So expect a lot of backlash from tech giants and also ordinary EU citizens. European ministers are meeting on Friday with their proposals. The French president wants to suspend free movement during security alerts. Getting 27 countries to agree to these proposals will not be easy. But Europe does not have a choice. The bloc is so well integrated that the only way they can fight this threat is together. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
2 days back, we raised a question. How would Europe have reacted had a country like India proposed such sweeping powers for the government against Islamism? Had New Delhi said the government will put electronic bracelets on radicals, you can imagine the backlash it would have caused. Now, these European countries are all secular, but many of them have laws to regulate Islam in particular. We've already told you about Austria. In 2015, it banned foreign funding to religious institutions. Then in Germany, in 2019, the government kicked off a pilot project to train imams. It created a special university course for them. Can you imagine that in India? Religious leaders being sent to a government university. Then there's Italy. From 2015 to 2018, Italy deported 16 radical imams. Even more specific are the laws of Denmark. Very interesting, and you must note this. Denmark has a law for children living in ghetto neighborhoods. What is that? Ghetto neighborhoods are enclaves with a large population of Muslim citizens. So children from these neighborhoods are required to spend at least 25 hours apart from their parents every week. This is mandated by the government. The children should spend 25 hours apart from their parents every week. What do they do for these 25 hours? They are taught Danish values. They are taught about Christmas and Easter traditions. As I said, Denmark is a secular country, but the government mandates Muslim children to learn about Christmas and Easter. They also take Danish language classes, these children. How does the government explain all of this? The government says it is westernizing these children and immersing them in the secular culture of the country. And this is a constitutionally mandated intervention. The government also says it is not an interference in religious affairs. It is something that they must do to tackle the rising threat of Islamism. And this is not unique to Denmark. This apparently is a global pattern now. Take a look at this report from 2 days back. It says in 2018, government restrictions on religion reached the highest level globally in more than a decade. This is a Pew Research report. It is based on laws around the world. What it found is very interesting. More and more countries are pushing laws, policies and actions that restrict religious practices. And most of them cite extremism as the reason for this. Let me quote what the European Union Charter of Fundamental Rights says about freedom of religion. Freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs shall be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law and are necessary in a democratic society in the interests of public safety, for the protection of public order, health or morals, or for the protection of the rights and freedoms of others. So there is freedom of religion, but with reasonable restrictions. Leaders in Europe and all over the world are well within their rights to make laws to protect their countries. In some cases, even sweeping powers may be justified. What about India? In India, the previous UPA government introduced 2 laws after the 26/11 Mumbai attacks. The first set up a national investigation agency, and the second strengthened existing anti-terror laws to allow suspects to be detained without bail for up to 6 months on the orders of a judge. The current NDA government introduced the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. It has special provisions to deal with terrorist activities. Both laws have been slammed as draconian. Neither is unique in the global context. The point we are making is simple. Whether it's India or Europe, leaders need authority to crack down on radicalism. And that's what Europe is doing. But as they embark on this, here's something else they should note, the European leaders should note. On the 29th of October, France was attacked. It is now passing a bill to regulate Islam. On the 2nd of November, Vienna was attacked. It is now proposing anti-terrorism measures. Both the European countries are looking at regulating imams, and both the laws will be tabled next month. And while the promptness is commendable, there would have been no need for these laws had Europe not waited for terror to strike. These are not quote-unquote preventive measures. These are reactions. The fight against terrorism cannot be a reflex action. What countries need to do is get to the root of the problem, to understand where the problem stems from. I'm talking about terror states, governments that use terrorism as a state policy tool, the likes of Pakistan. It is time to call them out and to cut ties with them. And it is here that the world needs to apply maximum pressure. Put the machinery we have to use. The FATF, Financial Action Task Force, use it. The United Nations Security Council, put it to some good use. Do you know why we have not been able to fight terrorism yet? Because state sponsors of terror are sitting on crucial panels of world bodies, and they are being re-elected for new terms. In 2018, 33,000 people lost their lives to terrorism the world over. The total number of terror attacks, 8,000 in 1 year. 2 years later, the world re-elected the biggest terror exporter to the United Nations Human Rights Council, Pakistan. 169 countries voted for it. So here's something that these 169 countries should know. Terrorism knows no boundaries. And India made this very clear to Europe during Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla's visit to Germany earlier this month. Countries exporting terror must be held accountable. Those supporting such countries also need to be pulled up. The likes of Turkey, the likes of China. Throw in the terror apologists too, the likes of Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia, Imran Khan, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. What will the world do with anti-terror financing agencies if some of its members cast a blind eye to terror and even back terror groups? Do you really think the 9/11 attacks would have been possible without Riyadh's knowledge? Or the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks without Pakistan's support? The same Pakistan continues to provide a safe haven to Lashkar-e-Toiba terrorists. This month, we've completed 12 years since the Mumbai attacks. And what has the world done to punish Pakistan? So when the leaders of Europe meet on Friday, here's something they should note. Austria will not be able to shut out terror just by closing some mosques. It needs to close the door on the states funding the radical infrastructure. The same applies to France. Between 2016 December and 2018 August, France shut down 20 mosques. They were suspected of preaching a radical interpretation of Islam. Did that prevent terror attacks on French soil? France saw nearly 30 attacks between 2016 and 2020. Like I said, fighting terrorism is not all that simple. No register on imams, no lock on prayer houses will be able to solve the problem completely. There were 3 commonalities between the 3 young men who recently attacked France. All of them were young, all of them were isolated, and all were self-radicalized. It was not just the work of radical imams in some mosques. It also happened on the internet. The world needs to account for the changing nature of terror. Look out for states that are radicalizing youth through social media, states that create an environment of hate in the name of religion. A French magazine republished some cartoons. The Pakistani Prime Minister gave hateful speeches. Next thing we know, there were terror attacks in Paris. One of the terrorists, Zahir Hassan Mahmood, was a Pakistani immigrant. He had watched videos of protesters brandishing knives in response to the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. Then he went to buy a butcher knife and he went on a stabbing spree. If after all of this, European leaders continue to look inwards only, then they can go on legislating for as long as they want to. If they don't get to the root of the problem, if they don't curb terror funding, if they don't strike at state sponsors of terrorism, they'll not make much headway in fighting Islamism. Let's shift our focus to America. One question that many have asked is this: will Joe Biden be tough on China? Will he continue what Donald Trump started, countering China's expansionism in the Indo-Pacific? The president-elect has shown which way America will go under him. Joe Biden made his first phone calls to world leaders. Guess whom he called? The leaders of Japan, Australia and South Korea. Two countries are Quad allies, and the third is a nation that is a key Asian ally for America's bid to rebuild global supply chains. And if this is any indication, countering China will top the agenda of the Biden White House.
If Beijing had hoped that Joe Biden would go soft on China, it did not read the tea leaves correctly. Joe Biden may still be fighting Donald Trump over the results, but he may continue to take Trump's China policy forward. Biden has reached out to America's allies. It was his first call to world leaders after the election. Biden dialed 3 countries: Australia, Japan and South Korea. Reports say he wanted to assure these 3 key allies, tell them that they can bank on America's support when it comes to regional security. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga told the press about his phone call. He confirmed peace in the Indo-Pacific remains a priority for Biden.
I just had a phone call with the next US President Biden for the first time. I have congratulated the next president and the first female Vice President Harris for being elected. He said that he looks forward to strengthening the US-Japan alliance and working together on achieving peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region.
During campaigning, Biden and the Democrats had signaled a hard line on China. They promised a pushback on economic, security and human rights issues, with Biden himself raising the issue of territorial integrity. During one of his speeches, he had raised India's border standoff with China, calling for stronger ties with New Delhi.
I said if the United States and India became closer friends and partners, then the world will be a safer place. If elected president, I'll continue to believe it and continue what I've long called for, including standing with India and confronting the threats it faces in its own region and along its borders.
But the China challenge is not limited to the military threat. Expanding America's military partnerships against China won't be enough. As president, Biden will have to counter China's power push through infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative. After the Wuhan virus outbreak, the world is feeling the need for an alternative supply chain. The United States will have a role to play there too. These are the challenges before the incoming Biden administration. With his phone calls to allies, Biden has sent a message. He is ready to take on the dragon. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
When will we have a Wuhan virus vaccine? A lot has been said this week following the Pfizer announcement, but the speculation discounted the bigger picture. We cannot forget that there are other candidates in the race, and I'm not talking about the vaccine race, I'm talking about the race to get a vaccine. And most of them already have invoices ready, these candidates. In other words, governments have pre-ordered potential vaccines. So those supplies, those pre-orders will be delivered first before the rest of the world gets a shot, and that changes a lot. So what we'll try to do over the next couple of minutes is account for all the possible factors in the vaccine race so that we can estimate when you and I will finally get a vaccine. Let's start by looking at the top candidates in the vaccine race, the manufacturers I mean. There are 10 vaccine candidates in phase 3 of the trial. They're being tried on thousands of patients, all of whom are being closely monitored. Let's take a look at these vaccine candidates. Pfizer and BioNTech's BNT162, Oxford AstraZeneca and Serum Institute of India's AZD1222 and Russia Sputnik 5. Bharat Biotech and National Institute of Virology's Covaxin. Then there is Johnson & Johnson's vaccine candidates, Moderna's mRNA-1273, Novavax's NVX-CoV2373, and finally 3 candidates being made in China that we don't know very much about, except for the fact that they caused a serious reaction in Brazil. All of these vaccine candidates are in stage 3 of trials. Out of these, Pfizer's shot has shown more than 90% effectiveness. Sputnik now claims it is 92% effective. India is among the many countries where Sputnik 5 is undergoing clinical trials. Where will these vaccines reach first is the question. The United States and Europe will be the first to get the Pfizer shot. These companies, Pfizer and the German company, the German partner BioNTech, have signed advanced purchase agreement for 100 million doses with the US government. With the EU, the agreement is for over 200 million doses. They also have a deal with Japan for 120 million doses and with the UK for 30 million doses. AstraZeneca has reached an agreement with Europe, Australia, India and Brazil. Russia has signed agreements with more than 10 countries, including India, Saudi Arabia, Mexico and Brazil. Bharat Biotech is in talks with more than 10 countries for its vaccine. Johnson & Johnson has a deal with the European Union. The United States has pre-ordered the Moderna vaccine. A $1.5 billion deal has been signed for 100 million doses of vaccines. Moderna also has a deal with Japan. Novavax has a deal with India. So what happens now? The World Health Organization demands a 50% efficacy for authorizing a vaccine. So vaccine candidates that have crossed this mark, like Pfizer and Sputnik 5, will approach the WHO and drug regulators of various countries to get their vaccines authorized. Now, till date, only 2 vaccines have been approved like this. Russia Sputnik 5 and EPI Vac Corona. Again, it's a Russian vaccine. Both of these vaccines were approved even before they reached phase 3 of the trials. AstraZeneca and Novavax are also seeking regulatory approval. Once a vaccine is approved, the ball goes to the court of the drug makers. Given the serious Wuhan virus pandemic, most drug makers have already begun producing these potential vaccines so that vaccines can hit the shelves as soon as they get a nod. They are producing vaccines in anticipation, potential ones at least. In India, the Serum Institute has produced 40 million doses of the AstraZeneca shot. The company has said they will soon start making the Novavax candidate as well. So if you're watching us from India tonight, this is the answer to when you and I will have a Wuhan virus vaccine. India has vaccine deals with AstraZeneca, Novavax, and for Sputnik 5. It is also in talks with Pfizer. These are the vaccine candidates you need to watch out for. Once they get a nod, it will only be a matter of time and, of course, hierarchy and priority of the government as to who they want to give a shot first before you get a chance to get the vaccine. As for the other potential candidates for the Wuhan virus, well, they too are bound to hit the shelves across the world at some point of time or the other. Sooner or later, they will find their way to the market. So, as of now, it is all about staying away from the Wuhan virus. 2021 will be about who gets the Wuhan virus vaccine first. Now, China is offering free trips to Tibet. It is not a promotional tour, but a propaganda trip. From ambassadors to journalists, China is hand-picking people and chaperoning them around Tibet. These trips have definitely not made their way to Instagram. How then are they turning out? Our next report finds out.
In the month of August, China held a meeting on Tibet, the 7th Tibet Work Forum. It was chaired by Chinese President Xi Jinping. He laid out a strategy to Sinicize Tibet, make it more Chinese. The plan included moving more Han Chinese to Tibet, teaching Chinese history, establishing a quote-unquote correct view of China. It is safe to say the meeting and its minutes were lashed globally. What did China do next? An attempt at damage control. It embarked on a journey to change the global image or the Chinese occupation of Tibet. Between the 7th and the 11th of September, China took the Swiss ambassador on a guided tour of Tibet. Why did it pick a Swiss official? Because Switzerland is viewed as a neutral country, and it has a strong say in Europe. So China took a long shot in trying to impress Switzerland. Cut to October. China took the Canadian ambassador to Tibet. Why Canada? Because if you remember, 2 Canadians are jailed in China. So Beijing has a power play here. Too bad these propaganda visits were not successful. Neither of the ambassadors have said much publicly since returning from Tibet. Their silence ruined the game for China. To make matters worse, a group of journalists who were chaperoned around Tibet have written rather nasty words about the Chinese government. Reuters noted, government officials in both Beijing and Tibet vetted the reporters from media organizations who were invited to join the trip. On the closely supervised tour, there was little opportunity to interact with ordinary Tibetans without government officials in attendance. In one Tibetan village, media crews saw signs that read, "Thank the party, listen to the party, follow the party." The reporters were allowed to speak to a 41-year-old Tibetan. The man said that he was so busy with work that he has forgotten Buddhism.
I needed to work in order to give my family a better life, so I went to work. That's why I don't have time to practice these religious activities. I can't say I've completely left Buddhism. I forget it when I'm busy with work.
China can lie, tutor, and blackmail all at once. No one is falling for its propaganda. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Taiwan has been the gold standard of pandemic response, but the World Health Organization has repeatedly refused to recognize its success. First, they refused to take into account Taiwan's warnings, and now this. And now it seems the WHO also has a problem with the country's name itself. On Facebook, comments with the word Taiwan are being blocked by the World Health Organization. It's a clear case of bias and censorship, but netizens have found an interesting workaround. Take a look.
The World Health Organization is picking up China's worst impulses. This time around, it's censorship. On Thursday, the WHO was live streaming on Facebook. The annual meeting of the World Health Assembly was underway. The comments section was getting pretty active. Many users wanted to talk about Taiwan, specifically why it was not invited to the meeting. But there was just one problem. The comments weren't going through. All comments with the words Taiwan were getting flagged. So they tried Formosa, another name for the island. Same result, a red exclamation mark. As it turned out, this was a mass censorship campaign. Words like China Wuhan pneumonia and China virus were also blocked. Even Winnie the Pooh was striked off. Soon Taiwanese users and politicians started sharing screenshots on social media. Taiwan's representative to the US said it was troubling that WHO was picking up China's habits. Facebook on its part has denied censoring Taiwan. It says no comments were disabled or restricted from its side. So that leaves the page admin, which is the World Health Organization. Page admins have access to a range of filters. Some of these can be used to block certain words from appearing in the comments section. But users found a workaround. They replaced Taiwan's A with the address sign and the I with an exclamation mark. WHO's censorship of Taiwan comes as no surprise. It regularly buckles under pressure from Beijing. Like in 2016, when Taiwan was blocked from the World Health Assembly. Since then, the EU, Japan, Australia and the US have demanded Taiwan's readmission. But the WHO is yet to budge. The fact is, Taiwan can help the world beat this pandemic. It managed to control the outbreak without a lockdown. The leadership has repeatedly offered to help. They've launched a campaign called Taiwan Can Help. They even took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. What they got in response was online censorship. This episode raises questions about the WHO's effectiveness, its ability to unite the world during emergencies. There is already talk of alternative mechanisms. The European Union wants to empower its own health agencies. It feels the current system has created confusion and distrust. The EU's plan is to create an entirely new organization by 2023. It will maintain a medical stockpile for Europe and keep track of outbreaks. As more and more countries decouple from the WHO, its significance will wane. And this is not good news for a world that's emerging from a deadly pandemic. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
On Wednesday, Alibaba was in the news for its Singles Day shopping season. 11 days, millions of orders and sales worth $74 billion. Yet on the same day, its shares plunged almost 10%. Why did that happen? Because Alibaba's founder Jack Ma has made a powerful enemy, the Chinese President Xi Jinping.
China's most powerful is taking on one of its richest. In most countries, this would be a fair fight, but not in China. Here, it's a no contest. Xi Jinping is the supreme leader. And Alibaba's Jack Ma learned this the hard way. At the center of this rivalry is the Ant Group, a fintech company controlled by Jack Ma. It was set to issue the world's biggest IPO, even bigger than Saudi Arabia's Aramco. But Beijing had other plans. The IPO was blocked just 2 days before trading was slated to begin. Reports say the order came right from the top, possibly from Xi Jinping himself. A $37 billion IPO was cancelled at the 11th hour. Questions were bound to arise. Why is Beijing going after the poster boy of Chinese tech? The regime says it is trying to protect investors' interest.
Here what I can tell you is that the decision of suspension is relevant. The Stock Exchange Department is fulfilling its responsibility of self-regulation. The decision is made by relevant exchange institutes based on laws to better safeguard capital market stability and protect investor rights and interests.
But in reality, this IPO is exactly what China needed. Beijing's motivations were more political than economic. Ant Group was described as China's JP Morgan. It had the power to disrupt China's financial sector, a sector that is controlled by China's 5 big state banks. It seems the party is not quite ready to let go of this control. Secondly, Jack Ma is losing favor with the Communist Party. Last month, he made a speech criticizing Chinese regulators. He said the system was outdated and accused state banks of a pawn-shop mentality. These comments are unlikely to have gone down well with the party. China's disdain for entrepreneurs is well documented, especially when they are outspoken. One example is real estate tycoon Ren Xiqiang. He once called Xi Jinping a clown, disrespectful at most, but in China it can only seal your fate. Ren is currently serving an 18-year jail sentence. After Ren, the party has now turned its attention to Jack Ma. He is the perfect target for Beijing. The world knows how rich Jack Ma is. It knows how big his company is. By cracking down on him, Xi Jinping wants to show the world who's the boss. It's an exercise in power, and it's not limited to Jack Ma. China is trying to rein in all powerful companies. Tencent, Alibaba, and Ant Group are the big targets. They have become too powerful for the party's liking. This fear of a crackdown led to a selling frenzy at the stock market. Over the last 11 days, Alibaba sold products worth $74 billion, a world record. Despite this, Alibaba's shares dropped almost 10%. It gives you a sense of how much power Chinese regulators wield. Alibaba's rivals had a similar fate. Tencent fell 7.4%, and phone maker Xiaomi 8.2%. In total, $280 billion of market value was wiped out. The message is clear. China's economy may evolve, its companies may grow, but the Communist Party and its leadership remains supreme. Bureau Report, we own. World is one.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.